Anand Mahindra is one of India's leading industrial figures, heading up Mahindra and Mahindra, the flagship company of the $6.3 billion Mahindra Group. As one of the premier businessmen in one of the world's fastest-growing regions, when our executive editor Alan Friedman caught up with him recently, he took the opportunity to get his take on how Asia, and specifically India, is positioned as the world emerges from the downturn.
Well, recovery would be an implication that there was a very serious meltdown of the kind there was in the West. The interesting thing about Asia, particularly India and China, was that we somehow skirted that major meltdown. Now, the reasons are different for India and China. The reasons China skirted that around was purely its staying power from a fiscal point of view. When you have over $1 trillion in reserves, and you have a centrally controlled economy, you can essentially prime your economy the way you want. And you have only a slight dent in growth, which is what they suffered. Their growth from above 10% came down to 8%. So hardly a crisis, hardly a recovery in that sense. From the Indian point of view, we had what was really a more insular economy than otherwise one would have preferred. So before the meltdown, there was huge pressure for us to get even more interconnected with the global economy. Ironically, it was our lack of interconnection which saved us, because our banking system was, in a sense, not as liberalized and therefore not prone to the derivative problems that most banks face.
Two other points I'd love to hear your opinion on, which I hear talked about more in Asia than in Europe and America. The way that domestic demand in India, China, Indonesia, and these countries accounts for 70–80% of GDP growth. It's really intra-Asian trade and even domestic trade and investment that's driving this growth, isn't it?
I'm not sure, Alan, whether that would apply to China. In fact, the conundrum in China is that a lot of its growth has, in the classic Asian manner, been export-led. Exports are 42% or higher of their GDP. In India, it's only 22%. Once again, the example I just gave of India's relative insular status, which has helped it, because if you are very export-led, then any downturn in the global markets would naturally have a disproportionate effect. So in India also, we have not just been more domestic-focused, we've also been more consumption-led, as I said. So India is in a very interesting position. If the government gets its act right together, uses the funds which are pouring into India today to invest in infrastructure, which anyone who's been to India knows is woefully inadequate, then I think we would have found the magic mantra to really kickstart growth on a much higher level.
Let's talk a bit about Mahindra and Mahindra. It's nearly $8 billion in revenues. You're one of the leading entrepreneurs, industrialists in your country. How do you see your group strategy in India and internationally going forward in 2010?
We really believe that Indian companies now, after having capitalized on the vast domestic market and demand, have reached that critical mass and scale which permits them to go into other countries and build even greater scale. But essentially, when a company like ours goes abroad, it's for a couple of things. One is it's for technology, obviously, in order to improve and enhance what we have done inside and internally. It is also to build a portfolio of customers, to get easier access to customers, because the empanelment process or the endorsement process for new suppliers around the world is a long drawn-out process. That's the next thing you get. And finally, it's distribution channels which you can get, as well as brand names. So these are the 2 or 3 things that really are what Indian companies need to acquire, and that will be our strategy, to look for, obviously, acquisitions which hopefully will not be high-priced anymore post the meltdown, and that should give us our next leap forward globally.
And you also have been working on a deal with British Aerospace, BAE Systems.
Essentially what they do, they are the second largest defense contractor in the world. And we have done a joint venture with their land systems, which talks about their vehicles, their armored vehicles, including the howitzers and the light artillery that they do. And we've been following that for the last couple of years. It involved getting permission from the government, which we received. And about a couple of months ago, the venture has started up, and we have a new CEO in place. So we're bidding for India's growing needs in the defense area.
Last question. What is it that the West, the Americans and the Europeans, don't understand about India that they should understand?
Well, it would be sort of arrogant, I think, to claim that there's some hidden jewel that no one knows about. I think the point is that everyone in the West understands a little piece of India. The question is, do you understand the whole mosaic? And it's difficult, it's complex. I dare say sometimes I feel I don't understand the whole mosaic, but that's the beauty of India. It's a vast country, it's a great adventure and a voyage of discovery, and I hope all Westerners make that journey.
Great. Anand Mahindra, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.